You couldn't fake Stringbean. He wasn't a studio invention. He wasn't molded by a record label, styled by a consultant, or written into some marketing campaign for rural nostalgia. David Stringbean Akeman was real, maybe too real for the world he helped build. He wasn't just a banjo player. He was the soul of a time that was already slipping away. A man from Appalachian dirt who carried the dust of the Depression with him every time he stepped onto the Opry stage. A performer who got laughs dressed like a scarecrow, but who knew more about pain, humility, and the value of $1 than anyone in the audience ever guessed. He was a throwback even when he was young. And by the 1970s, when country music was chasing rhinestones and radio polish, Stringbean was still wearing the same beat-up hat, the same threadbare overalls, and still walking to the stage with a banjo slung over his shoulder. Like it was 1935, and he just stepped off a mule wagon. Born on June 17, 1915, in the remote hills of Clay County, Kentucky, David Akeman came into a world most people today wouldn't recognize. His family was poor. Not the kind of poor you complain about online, but real poor. Dirt floor, home-sewn clothes, cornmeal for breakfast poor. They lived off the land, off what they could make, grow, or trade. There was no electricity, no plumbing, no safety net. But there was music. Old-time fiddle tunes, Baptist hymns, banjo rolls passed down from Civil War veterans and Scotch-Irish settlers who came before. David grew up hearing that sound. Mountain music that wasn't about money or fame, but about survival. About holding on to something human while the world tried to grind you down. He was fascinated by it, obsessed. And by the time he was a teenager, he'd made himself a banjo out of whatever scraps he could find. No fancy resonator, no name-brand headstock, just wood, string, and willpower. That was the beginning. Not of fame, but of identity. The nickname came early. David was tall and lanky, comically so, with long arms and legs that made him look like a cartoon even before he ever cracked a joke. Somebody called him Stringbean one day, and it stuck like dried mud. It wasn't meant to be a stage name, but that's the thing with names in rural America. The funny ones last longest. He started performing at local gatherings, barn dances, pie suppers, not for money or fun, for belonging, for the chance to be somebody in a world that didn't give many chances. In 1935, his break came. He won a talent contest, playing banjo and singing, and caught the attention of Asa Martin, a country singer and radio performer who invited Stringbean to join his act. It wasn't glamorous. They played on the radio, sure, but they also drove through back roads, slept in their cars, and played schoolhouses where their dressing room was a broom closet. But Stringbean didn't care. He had his banjo, an audience, and a name. And slowly, that name started to mean something. By the early 1940s, Stringbean's pickin' had gotten good. Not just front porch good, Opry good. But he didn't walk straight into Nashville. Nobody did back then. First, he had to tour, play radio spots, do the long, dusty road. And one of the people who noticed him during that time was none other than Bill Monroe, the father of bluegrass. At the time, Monroe was putting together the early blueprint for a new sound, something faster, tighter, built around virtuosity and high lonesome harmonies. He needed the right players, and for a time, Stringbean fit that puzzle. Now, let's be clear, Stringbean wasn't Earl Scruggs. He didn't play three-finger style. He was old school, claw hammer, frailing. A sound rooted in 1800s Appalachian ballads, not the polished, driving banjo lines Monroe would later make famous with Scruggs. But that's exactly what made him special. When Stringbean joined Monroe's Bluegrass Boys in 1943, he added something raw, something earthy, a link to the music's pre-bluegrass roots, when banjos were still handmade and songs were passed down by ear under kerosene lamps. Stringbean toured with Monroe during those formative years, appearing on the Grand Ole Opry and helping define what bluegrass would become. Even if he wasn't a technical innovator, he was a cultural one. His playing was pure mountain, untouched by commercialism, and his stage presence, unmistakable. Tall hat, long shirt, pants down to his ankles, one foot always tapping, and that sly grin, like he was always holding in a joke he couldn't quite say on the radio. But something was brewing in Stringbean's act, something that had less to do with notes and more to do with laughter. He started talking between songs, cracking jokes, telling stories in his slow Kentucky drawl. And it worked. People leaned in. They laughed. They remembered him. By the mid-1940s, he was just as much a comedian as he was a banjo player. That was rare. Most musicians hated mixing the two. They wanted to be taken seriously. But not Stringbean. He wasn't trying to be a virtuoso. He was trying to connect. And comedy, especially down-home folksy self-deprecating comedy, was his bridge. And it fit his image perfectly. He looked like a joke and played like a master. That contrast. Gold. And the Opry noticed. Stringbean joined the Grand Ole Opry officially in the late 1940s, and it changed everything. The Opry wasn't just a stage. It was the center of the universe for country performers. If you got in, you had made it. And Stringbean, he didn't just get in, he owned it. Night after night, he'd walk onto that stage in a beat-up hat and a shirt that reached his knees, holding a 5-string banjo and a crooked grin. And people ate it up. He'd crack jokes about fishing, farming, moonshine, his wife, always with that deadpan delivery and the timing of a vaudeville vet. He didn't sound like a joke, but he looked like one. And that tension made the laughter even stronger. It was self-parody, but not self-hate. He made fun of country life, but never put it down. Because it was his life, and everyone knew it. That's the difference between a hack and a legend. Authenticity. And in a world where country music was starting to polish itself, to smooth the edges, to chase suburban audiences, Stringbean was a holdout, a dusty, funny, banjo-pickin' reminder of where it all started. In the early 1950s, Stringbean struck up a partnership with Grandpa Jones, another banjo-playing comic who shared Stringbean's love for old-time music and old-time humor. The two became close friends and collaborators, performing together at the Opry and on the road. They weren't rivals, they were kindred spirits, and they were hilarious together. One tall and gangly, the other squat and scrappy. One slow-talking and sly, the other gruff and explosive. It was a perfect comedic pairing, like country music's Laurel and Hardy with banjos. Off stage, they were even tighter. They hunted together, fished together, shared stories and meals. It was one of those rare showbiz friendships that wasn't fake, wasn't forced. It just was. And it would matter more than anyone knew. When the tragedy came. But we're not there yet. If the Grand Ole Opry made Stringbean a Southern star, Hee Haw made him a national one. Premiering in 1969, Hee Haw was television's answer to rural America's enduring love of cornball humor and country music. It was part sketch show, part music showcase, and entirely drenched in country kitsch. But while most of the cast leaned into the slapstick, the exaggerated country accents, and the scripted gags, Stringbean didn't have to fake a thing. He was the real deal. Week after week, audiences across the country saw this tall, wiry man in oversized clothes amble onto the screen with a banjo in hand and a joke ready to go. His segments were short, often just a few lines, a pun, a one-liner about fishing or marriage. But his presence was unforgettable. He didn't need elaborate setups or flashy delivery. All he had to do was show up, look into the camera with that weathered face, and let his authenticity do the work. He wasn't playing rural. He was rural. And in a television landscape increasingly dominated by slick sitcoms and fast-talking urban comedies, Stringbean felt like a ghost from another time. And people loved him for it. But here's the strangest part. While his fame soared in the 1970s, Stringbean didn't change at all. He didn't move to a mansion. He didn't drive a Cadillac. He didn't flash jewelry or throw parties. Instead, he and his beloved wife Estelle continued living in a modest cabin outside of Nashville, raising vegetables in their garden, hunting for squirrels, and fishing in quiet Tennessee lakes. His clothes, handmade or secondhand. His car, older than many of his fans. His luxuries, a little more time in the woods, maybe a new pair of boots every few years. Why? Because he didn't trust money. And that wasn't paranoia. It was the hard-won truth of a man born into the Great Depression, raised during America's poorest years, and who'd seen bank failures wipe out families overnight. He was famously reluctant to use banks. There were rumors, later proven tragically true, that he kept most of his earnings hidden around his house, in jars, behind walls, under floorboards. He didn't trust the system. He trusted himself. He saved, but never splurged. He earned, but never flaunted. It wasn't because he was miserly. It was because he never forgot where he came from. When he joked on Hee Haw about being broke or living cheap, it wasn't a gag. It was his life. And in a town where everyone was trying to be flashier than the next guy, Stringbean's refusal to play that game was downright revolutionary. But not everyone was laughing. By the mid-1970s, the country music industry was changing fast. Outlaws like Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson were breaking the Nashville mold. Pop country crossovers were climbing the charts, and studios were pumping more money into image than into music. Stringbean saw it all, and didn't say much, but those who knew him say he didn't like it. He thought music was becoming a business, and losing its soul. He thought performers were putting on acts instead of sharing truth, and he hated how the values he grew up with, simplicity, humility, family, were being sold off in rhinestones. He never complained publicly. That wasn't his style. But his refusal to change spoke volumes. He kept dressing the same, picking the same, living the same. He didn't record pop albums. He didn't chase younger audiences. He didn't hire stylists or rewrite his act. He held the line, and in doing so, he became a kind of quiet protest figure. A living reminder of what country used to be before Nashville traded its overalls for sequins. Behind the jokes and banjo, Stringbean was a deeply grounded man. He and Estelle were devoted to each other. A rare, unshakable love that lasted through decades of touring, long nights, and hard living. They weren't flashy, but they were inseparable. He called her Estelle in public, baby in private. She packed his lunches. He brought her flowers from the side of the road. They didn't have children, but they had each other. And that was enough. Their lives were built on routine: morning coffee, fishing trips, garden chores, Sunday church. Even when Stringbean was at the height of his fame, he still made time to check on his garden, clean his guns, and walk the woods. He didn't need much, and he wanted even less. Some called him old-fashioned, but he didn't care. He believed in living right, not living loud. We won't dwell here, because you've already told the story of Stringbean's death in detail elsewhere. But we can't ignore it entirely. On November 10th, 1973, everything changed. Stringbean and Estelle returned home from the Opry to find their house had been broken into. What followed was one of the most senseless murders in country music history. It wasn't just a crime. It was a violation of trust, of innocence, of a way of life that Stringbean had spent his whole career trying to protect. The killers thought he was hiding cash in his house. And tragically, they were right. The very frugality that defined him ended up costing him everything. But we don't need to rehash the violence. That's not who Stringbean was. What matters more is how he lived, and how people remembered him. After his death, a strange thing happened. Nashville stopped laughing. For years, Stringbean had been the butt of hillbilly jokes, even as he delivered those jokes himself. But when he was gone, people started to realize how rare he really was. He He wasn't a character. He was a culture. He was the last bridge to a time when music came from cabins, not contracts. When comedy came from truth, not irony. When success didn't mean selling yourself, but staying yourself. His banjo still sits silent. His jokes still echo. His old friends, like Grandpa Jones, carried the sadness of his loss for the rest of their lives. But the spirit of Stringbean, that's still alive. In every young picker who plays clawhammer in the shadows of Nashville. In every old-timer who tells a fishing story with a wink. In every musician who chooses honesty over hype. Thank you for watching today's video. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment down below about who should we make next video.